Hello everyone, and welcome to our newest version of CRT's Cozy Corner, Shakespeare edition! I am so excited because every week we're going to be exploring a different one of Shakespeare's stories. Condensed, of course, but if you like what you hear, go out, get a copy of the script, give it a read, do a production in your living room, send us a video. We would love to see how you are inspired by these stories that we will be reading each week. For our first week, we are going to be reading one of my favorite Shakespearean comedies, A Midsummer Night's Dream. So, if you're ready, let's all take a deep breath. And let's get started. The course of true love never did run smooth. Lysander, Act 1, Scene 1. Flower garlands festooned the streets of Athens. It was almost Midsummer's Day, and everybody was making ready for the city's annual festivities. This year, there was even more reason to celebrate, for their noble Duke, Theseus, was about to marry the Queen of the Amazons, Hippolyta. Theseus and Hippolyta were relaxing in his cool marble palace, away from the glare of the sun. "Our wedding day is almost here," the Duke exclaimed. "I can hardly wait for the days to pass." Hippolyta smiled. "Those days will quickly melt into nights, which we will dream away in no time." Just then, the door burst open, and Theseus' friend Aegeus marched in with his daughter Hermia, and two rather anxious-looking young men. "What's the news, Aegeus?" Theseus asked. "My noble lord, I have chosen this man, Demetrius, to marry my daughter Hermia," Aegeus began, pointing at one of the men behind him. "But this man, Lysander," he continued, pointing at the other, "has bewitched Hermia and stolen her heart. My gracious Duke, please make Hermia marry Demetrius." Theseus looked at Hermia, who was staring sullenly at the floor. "What do you say, Hermia? Demetrius is a worthy young gentleman." "So is Lysander," Hermia protested. "According to the law of Athens, if you do not do as your father wants, you must become a nun," Theseus warned. "Relent, sweet Hermia," Demetrius began. "My love for Hermia is greater than his," Lysander interrupted, frowning. "Demetrius has been courting another girl, Helena, and she is still in love with him. He is a fickle man." Theseus sighed. "Demetrius, come, Aegeus. Hermia, you must do as your father says." He took Hippolyta's hand and beckoned Demetrius and Aegeus to follow them. Once they were alone, Hermia fell weeping into Lysander's arms. "The path of true love never did run smooth," Lysander murmured, stroking her cheek. "Hear me, Hermia. Tomorrow night, let's run away into the forest. There we can get married where the strict laws of Athens cannot touch us." "You're running away?" came a voice from behind them. Hermia looked up. It was her best friend, Helena. Brushing away her tears, Hermia explained the problem to her friend. When she had finished, Helena sighed. "Teach me how to look as beautiful as you do, Hermia," Helena exclaimed. "How do you manage to capture Demetrius's heart?" "I frown at him, yet he loves me still," Hermia replied. "Take comfort, Lysander. I will flee this place tomorrow." Lysander took Hermia's hand. "We must go. Goodbye, Helena. I hope Demetrius comes to love you as you love him." Helena watched sadly as the young lovers hurried away. "Why do I still love Demetrius, even when it's plain to see he dotes on Hermia?" she thought, biting her lip. "Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind. What can I do? I know. I'll tell Demetrius. all about Hermia and Lysander's plan. Maybe when they're gone, he'll choose me. Not far from the palace, a motley band of amateur actors had gathered at the house of the carpenter Peter Quince. They were there to rehearse a play for the Duke's wedding. "It's all our company here," Quince called out. "The play I've chosen is Pyramus and Thisbe. And it's a sad play about a man called Pyramus who kills himself for love." Nick Bottom, a weaver, nodded keenly. "A very good play, I assure you," he said to the others. "I like comedies." Quince sighed impatiently. Bottom clearly wasn't listening. "Bottom, you are to play the role of Pyramus." Bottom beamed. "I will move the audience to tears," he declared, turning his head to gaze heroically into the distance. "Francis Flute, you'll be his lover, Thisbe," Quince continued. "A woman?" Flute was horrified. "But I have a beard coming." He pointed to a few meager wisps of hair growing out of his chin. Quince squinted to see them, then shook his head in despair. "You can play it in a mask. Now, Robin Starveling, you are the moon. Tom Snout, you are the wall, and Snug, you will play the lion's part." Bottom was dancing with excitement. "Oh, let me play the lion too," he said. He bared his teeth, roared his best roar. Quince jumped. "You'll frighten the queen away," he said, scowling, and started handing out scripts. "Here are your parts. We'll meet in the forest tomorrow night to rehearse." Deep in the forest, in the silvery dark of night, and away from human eyes, a fairy king and queen were having an argument. "Titania, I beg you, give me that servant boy of yours," the fairy king, Oberon, was saying. "You have plenty of servants, and I need a page boy." The fairy queen shook her head. "Not for the whole of fairyland," she declared. She flicked her silken hair and flew away, her wings shimmering in the moonlight. Oberon stamped his feet. "Puck, come here," he said, beckoning his cheeky, tangle-haired sprite. "Fetch me that flower, the one they call Love and Idleness." Puck's green eyes twinkled with mischief, and he nodded. "I want to play a trick on Titania," Oberon explained, grinning wickedly. "I'll drop the juice of this flower on her eyelids when she is asleep. When she awakes, the next thing she looks upon, be it lion, bear, wolf, or bull, she will fall madly in love with it." "I'll search around the earth in 40 minutes, Puck promised, before darting off into the starry sky. Oberon's ears prickled up as he heard the sound of bracken cracking nearby. He sank into the shadows to see who was coming. It was Demetrius, searching the forest for Hermia. Helena was following close behind him. "I do not love you. Stop following me," Demetrius groaned. "Makes me sick to look at you." "Am I sick when I don't look at you?" Helena insisted. Demetrius rolled his eyes and carried on walking. Poor Helena hurried off after him. Oberon gazed after her, full of pity. "Don't be unhappy," he murmured. "Before the night's end, he will love you." A merry tinkle filled the air, and Puck appeared with the flower. "Welcome, wanderer," Oberon smiled, taking it from him. He squeezed the purple petals, dripping the precious juice into a tiny, shining bottle. "Here, take this juice," he said, giving the bottle to Puck. "Find the young man who just left here, and make him fall in love with his companion." "Fear not," Puck said with a wink. "I shall do as you ask." Oberon swept through the trees, searching for Titania. He found her asleep on a bed of violets, the air around her thick with their eyes' sweet, flowery scent. Oberon dripped flower juice onto her eyelids. "What you see when you awake, you will for your true love take," he chanted softly into her ear. Puck looped around branches and over tree stumps, searching for the young man. When at last he came upon a couple asleep on a mossy bank, he swooped down and dropped the flower juice into the young man's eyelids. Upon your eyes do I now throw all the power this charm does owe, he sang. Little did Puck know, but the sleeping couple was not Demetrius and Helena, but Lysander and Hermia. Puck had cast his magic spell over the wrong man. Nearby, Helena was stumbling around in the dark. Demetrius had stormed off without her, and she had been left frightened and alone. Luckily, she spotted Lysander asleep on the ground. "Lysander!" she cried out in relief. She hurried over and shook him awake. Lysander woke with a start. When he opened his eyes, the first person he saw was Helena peering down at him. The charm worked its magic at once, and he gasped in wonder. He'd never seen a beauty more enchanting. "Helena, I love you!" he cried. Helena stared at him in utter disbelief. "But you love Hermia." Lysander shook his head. "It's not Hermia, but Helena I love," he insisted, gazing up at Helena in awe. Helena scowled. "You must be mocking me," she cried, and dashed off into the forest. Without a moment's thought, Lysander leaped up and chased after her. He had forgotten all about sleeping Hermia. Moments later, Hermia stirred. Opening her eyes, she looked around for Lysander and realized she was alone. Crying out in panic, she hurried into the trees to look for him. Puck had no idea of the trouble he'd caused. He flew deeper into the forest looking for fun and mischief. Hopping across toadstools and splashing through streams, he slowed down when he came to a clearing where a group of men were rehearsing a play. Smiling to himself, he perched on a high branch to watch. "Thisbe!" Bottom bellowed. "Your breath smells as sweet as flowers!" He clutched his heart dramatically, then retreated behind a bush to wait for his next scene. Flute, who was playing Thisbe, looked confused. "Am I supposed to speak now?" Quince groaned. "Yes!" he shouted. Flute coughed. He began to speak in a high, squeaky voice. "Most radiant Pyramus, you're as beautiful as a rose, and as true as a horse that never tires." Puck raised his eyebrows. "I have never seen such a silly play," he thought. Then an idea popped into his head. He darted behind the bush and whispered a magic charm into Bottom's ear. Bottom didn't suspect a thing, but Puck, hiding in the branches, doubled up with silent laughter as he watched his spell take effect. Bottom's ears shot up, with hair sprouting all over them. His nose grew long and bristles spread all over his face. Within seconds, his head had been changed into that of a donkey. Unaware that anything at all had happened to him, Bottom crashed back into the clearing and ran towards Flute with his open arms. "Ee-haw! If I were fair, I would be yours." Flute took one look at the donkey-headed brute hurtling in his direction and let out a blood-curdling scream. "Help! A monster!" Tripping over his own feet, he fled in the opposite direction, with the other terrified actors hot on his heels. Bottom was confused. Was this part of the play? What on earth had made them run away? He looked around, wondering what to do. Deciding he should probably try to head back home, he lumbered off through the bushes, braying a tune as he went. Nearby, Titania, the fairy queen, was sleeping on her bed of flowers. At the sound of Bottom's braying, Titania lifted her head. She took one look at his long, bristly nose as he emerged through the trees, and fell instantly in love. "What angel wakes me from my flowery bed?" Titania breathed. "Sing again, beautiful stranger." Bottom grinned at the fairy queen, revealing a set of enormous front teeth. Sitting down next to her, he brayed out another tune. Titania stroked his long furry ears. "Feed him apricots and dewberries, with purple grapes, green figs, and mulberries," she commanded her fairy servants. Puck, who had been watching the curious scene from above, covered his mouth to stifle a giggle. Mischief had been made. He darted off to tell Oberon. "In love with a donkey?" Oberon roared with laughter. This has worked out better than I could have planned. The Fairy King fell quiet when he saw Hermia marching through the trees below with Demetrius in hot pursuit. "Where is Lysander?" Hermia demanded, pushing through the branches. "I fear you have killed him in his sleep." Demetrius looked hurt. "I am not guilty of Lysander's blood. Why are you so cruel to me when I love you so?" Hermia scowled and marched on. Sighing, Demetrius hung back, exhausted. It was no use. Hermia would never love him. Yawning, he lay down on the mossy ground, drew his cloak around him, and closed his eyes. Oberon looked at Puck in confusion. "Did you cast a spell on this man as I asked?" he whispered. Puck shook his mop of curly hair. "Not this one." "What have you done?" Oberon groaned, realizing Puck's mistake. "Fly through the forest swifter than the wind," he whispered. "Find the other girl and bring her here." As Puck disappeared, Oberon crept over to sleeping Demetrius and sprinkled flower juice on his eyelids. "Flower with your purple dye, sink into the sleeper's eye," he chanted. He flew back into the trees where Puck was already waiting for him. "Helena is nearby with Lysander," Puck whispered. "Lord, what fools these mortals are," he laughed. Just then, Helena and Lysander came into the view below. "Why do you think I'm teasing you? I love you," Lysander declared. "You should be saying that to Hermia," Helen pouted. She stopped abruptly when she saw Demetrius lying on the ground. "Demetrius?" Demetrius, who had been fast asleep, woke up with a start. Seeing Helena, he jumped up and held out his arms. "Oh, Helena, goddess, perfect divine, I love you." Helena stepped backwards. Previously, nobody had loved her, and now everybody claimed they love her. She could see only one explanation. "You are all teasing me," she said bitterly. Lysander scowled at Demetrius. "You are unkind, Demetrius. Do not be so. You love Hermia." "You can keep Hermia, for I love Helena," Demetrius replied. The two men began bickering. Hermia appeared. "Why did you leave me?" Hermia cried, running to Lysander. Lysander shrugged, looking away. "I love fair Helena now." Furious, Hermia turned to shout at Helena. "You thief of love! I'll scratch your eyes out with my nails!" Before long, a terrible argument had erupted. In a fit of fury, Lysander challenged Demetrius to a duel. Oberon rubbed his temples as he watched the disaster unfold. This was not how things were meant to be working out. "Follow them," he said to Puck, pointing at the men. "Keep them apart until you have cured Lysander. I'll find Titania and release her from the charm." Puck leaped into the air. "As you wish, my fairy lord." Luckily for Puck, the two young men had plunged so rashly into the forest that they had lost one another already. "Where are you, Demetrius?" Lysander growled. "Here, villain, drawn and ready," Puck replied in a perfect imitation of Demetrius's voice. "Follow me this way." Lysander stumbled off after the voice. Demetrius plunged through the shadows behind him. "Where are you, coward?" he cried, pointing his sword into the trees. "Follow me," Puck called in Lysander's voice. Flitting in the opposite direction, Demetrius dived after him. He led the two young men in a merry dance through the trees, going round and round until they were dizzy. Try as they might, they simply could not seem to find one another. Finally, they gave up. Neither realized it, but they were almost in the same spot where they had started. Without any idea how close they were to each other, they both sat down to rest. Helena and Hermia, who had grown weary of following them and trying to stop them fighting, settled down nearby. Before long, everyone was fast asleep. Puck breathed out a sigh of relief. "On the ground, all sleep sound," he whispered. Swooping down, he dropped some flower juice on Lysander's eyes. "When you wake, you'll delight in the sight of the lady you once loved." Puck flew off and found his master watching over Titania, who was fast asleep with her arm around Bottom's hairy neck. "I met Titania in the woods earlier, draping this fool's hairy head with flowers," Oberon laughed. "When I teased her, she begged me to leave her alone and promised to give me the servant child. Now, I have what I wanted. I will release her, I think." Oberon squeezed the flower, dropping the last of its juices on Titania's eyelids. Titania, wake, my sweet queen. Titania yawned and opened her eyes. Seeing her husband, she smiled. Oberon, my love, what dreams I've had. I thought I was in love with a donkey. Her laughter was like the twinkle of bells. Oberon pointed at Bottom. There lies your love. Bottom was snoring so loudly, the leaves around him trembled. Titania gazed at him in amazement. What an ugly face, she said. Gentle Puck, change him back, Oberon told the sprite. Then he took Titania's hand and looked at her fondly. Come, my queen, Oberon chuckled. Tomorrow we'll dance at Theseus's wedding and bless the happy pair. Puck watched them flit away and then bent and whispered into Bottom's ear. The charm was undone, and in an instant, Bottom's head was back to normal. Dawn broke, and a warm glow flitted through the tangled trees. Then a horn blasted. Theseus, Aegeus, and Hippolyta had come out hunting. What creatures are these? Theseus said, pulling his horse's reins. On the ground below were 4 young people, all fast asleep. Aegeus gasped, My lord, this is my daughter Hermia, and this is Lysander, Demetrius, and Helena, he cried in surprise. With another blast of the horn, the 4 sleeping lovers awoke. My lord, Lysander said, scrambling to his feet. Explain yourselves. I thought you 2 were sworn enemies, Theseus said, nodding at Lysander and Demetrius. I cannot say how I came here, Lysander admitted, looking around in confusion. All I know is I came here with Hermia. Demetrius nodded, looking equally unsure. I don't know why, but my love for Hermia has melted like snow. The object and pleasure of my eye is only Helena. Aegeus turned pink with indignation. Demetrius was meant to be in love with his daughter, Hermia. He opened his mouth to speak, but Theseus held up his hand to silence him. Wonderful, Theseus smiled. Come with Hippolyta and me, and we can all be married. Taking Hippolyta's hand, Theseus led the 2 couples back to his palace. Nobody noticed Bottom waking up. I've had the strangest dream, he thought, rubbing his face sleepily. I thought I was a donkey. Clambering to his feet, he looked around. Now, where is everyone? That day, 3 weddings took place in the city of Athens. The Duke married his queen, Hermia married Lysander, and Helena married Demetrius. They were all as happy as can be. To close the day's events, there was to be a performance of the play Pyramus and Thisbe in their honor. Bottom had found his way to the palace just in time, and Quince, faint with relief, staggered on stage to announce the start of the play. You will see a beautiful lady, Thisbe, he said, pointing at Flute, who, anxious not to be taken for a real lady, was flexing his muscles in the wings. And a handsome man, our hero, Pyramus. Bottom gave a cheery wave. They're in love, as you shall see. Snout waddled on stage, dressed rather cumbersomely as a wall. I, Snout, am a wall, he announced. Through this chink, Pyramus and Thisbe whisper often. Bottom dashed forwards. Thisbe, kiss me through the hole of this wall, he said, smacking his lips against Snout's armpit. I kissed the wall, not your lips at all, Flute squeaked as daintily as he could, tripping over his dress. Then Snug clambered on stage, baring his teeth. Ladies, he said, addressing the audience, I am a fierce lion, but don't be afraid. I'm Snug really underneath the costume. He gave his most fearsome roar and chased the screaming Flute off stage. The audience tittered. The play was far better and far worse than they had expected. In the next scene, Bottom reappeared on stage. Thisbe eaten by a lion, he sobbed. Oh, she was the fairest dame ever to live. Now I must die. He pulled out a fake dagger and pretended to stab himself. As Bottom collapsed in a heap on the floor, Flute reappeared as Thisbe. Dead, my dove? He wailed, waggling Bottom's limp head as he cradled it in his arms. Come, trusty sword. He dropped Bottom's head, picked up the dagger, and pretended to stab himself too. As Flute flopped down on top of Bottom, there was a long pause. Then the audience stood up, clapping and cheering with delight, and some measure of relief that it was all over. Bottom crawled out from underneath Flute's leg. "Now do you want us to dance for you?" he said, with a broad grin. "No more," begged the Duke, chuckling. "It was a fine play, thank you." The audience whooped, and Bottom and Flute clambered. Floating in the air above, unseen, the Fairy King and Queen had been watching everything. "Hand in hand with fairy grace, we will sing and bless this place," Titania sang. She took her husband's hand, and they flitted about, their wings twinkling like stars. Puck flew through the palace, sprinkling everyone with fairy dust. "Good night, everyone," he whispered, "and may all three couples live happily ever after." Thank you so much for joining us. I can't wait to see you again next week. Have an awesome day.